adjacent. Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. I also want to thank the entire infrastructure of the Creative Mornings Portsmouth crew, because this has been just a wonderful experience. And I haven't even started talking yet. I feel so supported, and I'm like, I want to adopt the manifesto to be my own personal manifesto too. It makes me really, really happy that we live in a world where this is happening on a regular basis. Just quick personal shout out to my partner in crime, Lindsay Dean, who is like the creative genius behind all of what I have to say in the world. And if it wasn't for her, you wouldn't know about me, and you wouldn't know about me in the way that I want you to know about me. So thank you. And also personally, I am also very lucky to have a partner. Thank you, Bill, for being here. Everybody should be so lucky to have someone in their lives that gets them the way he gets me. So without further ado. We're gonna talk today about a bunch of stuff. You're gonna see a lot of disco balls, and you're gonna see a lot of flowers, and that we could just basically end the discussion there. Like, that's all you need to know about me. The reason why I use disco balls emblematically is because when you are out on the dance floor, you are at your, hopefully, freest. Like, if you can get past the, like, is anybody looking at me part, if you can dance that way, you're starting to understand a little bit about who you are when your intuition is active. It took me a while to realize why I was so drawn to them. I mean, let's face it, they're also sparkly, and that's a plus. But the flowers are just my personal way of getting what I call flower drunk. It's very, very easy to do during the day, so it's my favorite kind of day drunk too. So, what I want to start by saying is that vision and intuition are synonymous, because they both guide us to participate in the highest good for the greatest number. That is your intuition's primary function. And when we are inspired by a vision of something, it's calling us to do the same thing. Let's see. I went to sleep. I knew it. There we go. Vision is also more than just the function of your eyeballs, which are what is collecting all the visual data that you're going to use with your brain. Intuition functions very similarly too. It just uses some different things, which I'll explain to you. It uses clairvoyance, which is the ability to see things. Some clairvoyance or objective clairvoyance, where we actually see with our eyeballs things that other people don't. And I discovered the hard way that was happening. I assumed that the things that I was seeing, other people were seeing too. Clairvoyance for me is mostly subjective, because when you're working with somebody personally, it's not great to get distracted. So I call it the movie theater in my mind. So that's collecting visual data. Intuitive empathy is another main component of intuition. You guys all know about intuitive empathy because, number one, it's the most frequently experienced form of intuition, and also because it's a lot like emotional empathy. Emotional empathy is how I define it. That thing in humans, our finest quality, I believe, that gives us the impulse to imagine what somebody else's lived experience is like. Even if someone has had a similar experience to us, we don't assume that it's exactly like ours, but we can imagine. And if someone has nothing in common with us, we still can connect with that person because we are willing to enter into their world. Intuitive empaths don't have to try. We are always empathic, and our job is to make sure that we put down everything that we pick up so that we're not getting your headaches or crying all the time, that kind of thing. And then mediumship is sort of considered to be at the far reaches of the woo. I've been a medium, I've been an intuitive since I was a kid, but I didn't know it. And mediumship is something that doesn't scare me. Mediumship is basically being able to communicate with and receive information from maybe affectionately the disembodied, plants, people who've crossed over, that kind of thing. So intuition is getting data through seeing, feeling, and getting. But the information that we receive also needs to be interpreted. It needs to have meaning, and that is why it is similar to vision. It's more than just the function of those things. Those things in themselves don't necessarily matter to us, it's what we do with them that counts. Oops. Okay. Yes. So what connects them both is the meaning they provide. So when we access vision, it gives us something that makes our lives worth living. It gives us purpose. And when we have a functioning intuition, we get to access the same exact things all the time. And I don't know if you guys ever saw this, it's very old, but it's this hilarious SNL sketch with Christopher Walken where he, I think, was promoting one of the movies he was doing, and he did this sketch called Trivial Psychic, and it was just so funny because he would stand there and he'd be like, wait a minute, I'm getting something. You're gonna run downstairs, it's raining out, you're gonna hail a cab. The first cab is gonna pass you by. And everybody would be waiting to be like, and that was it, right? So the information itself is not the important thing. The thing that's important is how it moves us, how it helps us feel more comfortable in our own skin, how it helps us make decisions that are important to us, helps us feel at home in our own hearts. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the way that our culture contextualizes intuition, which guarantees mischief, mayhem, unhappiness, and that it will always be fatally misunderstood. This is the thing that keeps you from your own intuition. We don't know a lot about intuition because we're afraid of it. It's scary. And because we're afraid of it, we don't know a lot about it. We don't really have a language for it, but what's interesting is that the closest we come, the language we use to describe intuition lines up almost exactly with the language of creativity, which I think is super cool. But we're getting there. Part of what we need to do, of course, is normalize it. It needs to be less spooky. And I talk about this context all the time because if we don't acknowledge it, it just sort of acts as like the gas in the room that we're breathing, but we don't know is affecting us. The context that we put intuition in is that we believe it is rare, unreliable, and dangerous. And this is how it shows up. Rare in that only certain people are intuitive. And they're usually weird, right? If you look at how intuitives are portrayed in popular culture, they're not at PTA meetings, right? They're not like, they don't wear suits. It's chorny, it's, right? It's people who are tortured by what they see. It's eccentric, right? And this has not been my experience. It's also unreliable. So we kind of, if we're lucky enough in our lives to have an experience of identifying our intuition when it's active, and I guarantee you all have, what we usually do is ask it to prove it immediately. And we want it proved logically, rationally, analytically. And sadly, what we don't understand is that intuition and logic provide great information just in different ways, and they are friends. They like to work together. But since we don't know that, we put them in like a cage match to the death, and it never works, right? And so we just sort of disregard our intuition. Well, I guess it wasn't right. So this is a huge tragedy, in my opinion, and I think a lot of my work is about getting people to understand what it feels like when your intuition is active so that you don't so you're not mean to it, so you're not rude, right? Don't be a jerk to your intuition. And then the dangerous part is kind of really, I don't know if I need to explain this to you because you already probably have an experience with that. It contributes to the whole scary thing, but without creating an entirely adjunct Creative Mornings talk, I'm going to tell you the two ways that it manifests as being dangerous. The first one is through institutional religion, because hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years ago, anything that wasn't white, male, cis, hetero, rich, was determined to be immoral. And we found that the resources of our world were always weaponized against anything that wasn't that. So that's why I have a lot of clients who automatically assume that I don't believe in God, or I'm not a spiritual person, or I am immoral in some way. And also, just not for nothing, but it is October 11th and we are within driving distance of a place that gets over 1 million visitors every year from September to December to support that myth that there's some agent of evil at work. When it comes to intuition, we are like devil-friendly kind of community. I almost wore a witch's hat. I really just wanted to come out in front swinging. But here's the thing. You know this, that if we could source our own spiritual experience, we wouldn't be lost, we'd be powerful. Right? And so that whole power structure would just get upended. So let's just, right? So that's the first danger. The second danger actually comes from our more intellectual friends, of which I sort of consider myself part of, college graduate, right? I was surprised by this as in my first few years of working, which is that any person that considers themselves very rational and analytical, data-driven, science, supporter, which also I am, all of those things. Intuition, or someone who's really comfortable with their intuition or uses the language of intuition, is usually considered to be at the least emotionally immature and at the most probably mentally ill. That one, like I said, surprised me, but that's the one that is actually the hardest for me to respond to, because what it does is it just discounts it. There's no seat at the table for intuitive research. We don't teach it to our kids in school. But like Ghostbusters, okay, they can be researchers, right? Okay, so because we're in this context, we have to shout it out so that we know we're in this context. But it's the thing that creates most of the mischief in terms of people feeling comfortable with their intuition. Okay, my 21st birthday. Just want to say this is the first time I've ever told this story publicly. My 21st birthday started out very auspiciously with me sobbing in the closet of the room that I rented. I was a senior in college. I was smack up against the fact that my whole life had been preparing me to go to college. I had done very well, and I had no flippant idea what I was going to do afterwards, and I was terrified. If I could go back in time and give her a hug, I think she would have been freaked out by that, but still, I would have told her, dry your eyes, sweetheart, get your day going. You are about to receive the most important 21st birthday present in the history of 21st birthday presents. So I did kind of pull myself together because I had a day planned with my relatives. We had a wonderful day celebrating. And while I was out with my family, I got a call from my friend Marla, who said, surprise, David and I want to come visit you tonight. Are you going to be home? We have a cake for you that we made. We have presents. And I was like, I don't think you say no to something like that anyway, but I was like, yes. I felt very special. The day progressed. I came home. David and Marla came over. So we're hanging out talking, and I should say that this was in 1987. So what was happening in 1987 in popular culture was the New Age. And I want to qualify this by saying that I was the kid that would go to the library as soon as I could walk there by myself, check out 25 books on everything from like ESP to psychic phenomena, reincarnation. Every minute that I could read about stuff like this, I would. And it followed me through teens and my college years. But I really just believed it was a hobby. It was groovy, it was interesting. I had no idea that the New Age and the New Age bookstore would become a flashpoint for me, not necessarily for all the information, but it was a hub for people who were interested in alternative healing modalities, people who were owning their intuition. I mean, I see this now, and writing about it. And Marla and my friendship was based on workshops and things we were reading and ideas. I mean, the joke really was on me, you guys, right? So there we are talking, and I suddenly start to feel a little odd. I felt dizzy. I felt like my hands started to buzz a little, and my feet started to get tingly, and it felt like the energy was moving with that tingle, like up to the top of my head and down to the bottom of my feet. So of course, I started wondering, what's in the cake? Like, why is it a homemade cake? Is this like a surprise or a surprise? Like, what's going on here? I felt like all I needed to do in that moment was smile and nod and pretend that I was participating in the conversation because these were my friends and I loved them. Now, I will say this, I had just met David because Marla and David were newly dating. And Marla and David had been spending a lot of time together indoors. And so I had only now just been able to sit down and say, you're David, I've heard so many nice things about you, kind of thing, right? So we're talking about spirituality and having a great time, and then I'm starting to kind of rotate like a disco ball, and as I'm pretending to have this conversation with them, the one they're having, the curtains pull away from the movie screen in my mind, and I see 3 different vignettes. The first one was of a woman sitting with her back to me. We were in her kitchen. The window was open. I could see that there were cornfields all outside. She was sitting and chain smoking. Very impressive beehive hairdo, by the way. That is like some chemically threatening amounts of hairspray. It was so tall. And she was sitting and chain smoking underneath a single light bulb on a cord. This is way before it became really trendy to do that. And the smoke was rising above her, but I looked at her shoulders and my whole body started to feel scared and tense. And this is because I knew there was danger in her house, and she was smoking, trying to decide how she was going to deal with it. Next vignette, there was this short, stocky, kind of burly guy raging through the house. I knew he was drunk. I knew that he was the father or the dad counterpart to the woman with the beehive hairdo. There were kids upstairs, I knew, sleeping. She usually just decided to stay out of his way and ride it out, but sometimes that wasn't possible. And he was like just in a rage. Third vignette is David in a cap and gown at a huge sports arena that had been converted to do a college graduation. And he was getting a master's degree in English and teaching. He was going to go on and live his dream. I did know from Marla that he drove a cab, his dad drove a cab, and as I'm watching the scene unfold of his graduation, I'm hearing that man screaming again, "You think you're better than me? You think you're better than me?" Meaning, you know, you're gonna drive a cab, I drove a cab, there's nothing wrong with that. And I suddenly felt like what I needed to tell David was that the next 4 years of his life were going to go by whether he was driving a cab or not, and that there were resources available to him, that he needed to apply to college, that it would be taken care of, he could manage it, and he was going to go on and live his dream. And I have never, to that point, felt as peaceful, happy, clear. It was distinct how good I felt. And I've gone over the next moment in my mind endlessly. Why did I open my mouth and tell him what I saw? Because that's what I did. I was compelled to tell him. I had no concern for how I would appear to be. So I told him everything I've just told you, and David looked at Marla and said, "What have you been telling her about me?" And Marla, mouth agape, pulled herself together and said, "Nothing." And in that moment, my entire life changed, because I had been walking around in the same context that I just explained to you. I wasn't special. I hadn't practiced my whole life to hone this skill or develop this gift. My intuition showed up fully formed, fully operational, and in a way that seemed like it wanted to be useful, right? Wanted to improve people's lives. The evening wound down, I went to bed that night, and just in case I had any doubt of the magnitude of what had just happened to me, I could not get out of bed for the better part of the next 3 days. I physically felt like I couldn't breathe. I did a little bit of stuff, like I went to a couple classes, I made sure I was presentable, but like I was sleeping all the time. And then that's when I started to really freak out. I thought, well, I'm probably losing my mind. This is how, I don't have to worry about what I'm going to do after college because this is it. But by the end of those 3 days, what I had the ability to do was process everything that had just happened. And what I realized was that I had been wrong about everything I understood about intuition. It kind of came with a built-in mission. I didn't know it at the time, but it was so impactful that I not only instantly knew I had come to this earth to live this life, but I sort of knew that, more would be revealed, like just graduate, we'll figure it out. But the thought that I could do what I had only been reading about for, years and years and years was one of the most shocking things that I ever found out about myself. When I look back on my childhood, I can see it, right? But I also needed the outside world to help me get to the other side. And that's why I embraced my intuition and the vision it gave me, completely trusting in it. So, it was the gift of vision, right? But it was also the vision for my gift. Because from that day forward, when I began to work with people in groups, and it took a couple of years for me to kind of get into that place where I was comfortable seeing clients and teaching classes, I never ever assume that I am the source of my clients and my students' intuition. My vision is that we are all intuitive, that it's our own natural resource, that it is abundant, it is plentiful, it always is accurate, and it's not scary. So instead of my intuition further separating me from the world, it actually pulled me into the world, out of the margins, and that's what I live by example every single day. We are all intuitive. It's fully formed. It does not need to be developed. Now, not everybody necessarily needs to make it their career, but I do, because the work that I do in the world feels necessary and important. You only have to ask yourself the question of what if I believed my intuition was my most natural resource to understand why it is important in the world. So my vision is vision, but it's also your vision too. Thank you.
Yes, keep it going for Susan Gorman, everybody.